Hello there, coming to you from the bunker. This is Watchtower in Focus, episode 26, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. If you are watching this episode on August 14th, then you are watching it on the very day that the New York Child Victims Act legislation goes into effect. Among other provisions, New York has opened up a one-year window in which survivors of abuse have the opportunity to file claims against any organization or person who contributed to the abuse of a victim. Watchtower is headquartered in New York, and right out of the gate, heading up what is expected to be a flood of lawsuits from all 50 states, the organization's legal nemesis, Irwin Zalkin, is filing several lawsuits in which all 8 members of the governing body are named as defendants. Joining me to discuss this incredible development is ever-present co-host Mark O'Donnell. Filling in again for Covert Fade is friend of the show, filmmaker Javier Ortiz, and I am delighted to welcome our special guest to comment firsthand on proceedings, San Diego and New York attorney, Irwin Zalkin. So,
Hi.
Mark, Javier, and Irwin, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Good to be here, Lloyd.
So, Irwin, it was just remarkable watching the press conference yesterday. How validating is it for survivors to be able to speak out in this way and pursue Watchtower over what happened to them?
Well, Lloyd, I think it's extremely validating, and it's a way of feeling empowered. You know, for so long, people feel victimized, or they feel like they're a victim. They don't know what to do. They're ashamed. They're embarrassed. They can't come forward. It's very difficult to do that. But once you cross that threshold, and when you come out and you can speak publicly, and you can do that in front of the media as Heather Steele and Michael Ewing did yesterday, it's extremely life-altering. They were both telling me how they just felt so strong and suddenly felt so empowered and just different. It's a different state of mind.
Sure. And Mark, you've been following this case. Were you interested to see this window of opportunity pounced upon so quickly?
Yes, I was, and but I think that Irwin and his team have certainly done their due diligence in representing survivors, and I really feel that he and his team take a vested interest in these people, particularly the 2 that did the press conference yesterday. And that was Michael Ewing and Heather. And I wanted to say that. You know, and maybe Irwin can comment on this, but I was very impressed with the fact that Michael started off his section of the press conference by describing the impact that not only the abuse had upon his life, but the impact that the abuse had upon his behavior beyond just the abuse, meaning the abuse caused him to take up drinking as a coping mechanism, and he was involved in some drugs, and what is worse, he was victimized twice. And maybe Irwin can comment on this, but what I saw in that interview with both of them, particularly with Michael, was that this man had not only been victimized by a child abuser, but he had been disfellowshipped for homosexual activity by the congregation, which drove him further down into, I guess, a depression and behavior that made a bad situation even worse.
Yeah, with Michael, his situation was that he came from a very, very committed and devout Jehovah's Witness family. He himself was it felt that his future would be to become an elder. I mean, he wanted to. That was his path that he was choosing to follow, and to that end, he was put in. His father, who was an elder, had connected him with the abuser, Michael Rust, who was a single male and seemed to have this a good relationship with children, with young boys, a mentor type relationship with young boys. And so his father felt it was appropriate for Rust to mentor Michael Ewing, his son, and become his Bible study teacher and help him along the path to where he wanted to be, which was eventually, hopefully, to be chosen as an elder. And so he completely trusted this man, and this man would use religious text and to groom him into engaging in sexual activity at the age of 14 years old. He would talk about how he has now reached puberty and this is normal, and he's going to sort of teach him what he needs to know and what he needs to understand about sex and that sort of thing. And he would engage with, show him pornographic materials, and then it led to very, very aggressive sexual conduct between them. Michael thought this was the normal thing. Michael thought this is what he had to do, what happens, until at some point when he was 21 years old, and the abuse stopped when he was about 17, but at around 21, he started struggling as a teenager. He started to get the idea and understand that this was not normal and this was hurtful to him. And he started drinking and he started taking drugs to bury the pain. And then when he was 21, he reported this and told his father what happened. And his father said, well, we need to go to the elders. And he did, and there was a judicial committee. And the upshot of that was that he was disfellowshipped, as was Mike Rust, but he was disfellowshipped for engaging in homosexual activity, as if though a 14-year-old kid understood and consented to doing something that was obviously considered to be a sin. You know, that was the problem. That betrayal when he went to the elders and he's telling the elders the story and this pain that he has been suffering for years. By then, the response was, well, you know, you deserve it. You were engaging in homosexual activity. You need to be disfellowshipped. That was really hurtful to this kid. And to this day, I will tell you, to this day, he still considers himself a Jehovah's Witness. He was reinstated at 22, and he considers himself a Jehovah's Witness. And there's a terrible conflict in bringing a lawsuit and making that decision to do that. But he feels that the organization needs to be cleansed of this. You know, they do consider themselves or want to consider themselves as a clean organization. Well, this is not clean. The abuse of children is not clean. So if his commitment is to cleanse the organization, he actually sees us as helping the organization.
Javier, just bringing you in, we've seen a number of lawsuits down through the years, many of which, in fact, have been brought by Irwin and Irwin's firm. But never before have we seen the governing body listed as defendants in a lawsuit. How surprised were you, and what feelings did you have when you saw that included in the press release?
Yeah, I was happy to see that. I was surprised, like everyone else. A couple of fist pumps when I heard the news, and you know, just it comes to your imagination goes off, and you want to envision these guys on the witness stand and having to answer direct questions and not being able to dodge or skirt it or just release some kind of blanket statement. We abhor child abuse. You know, I'm hoping we get to witness that on you know, publicly. These guys having to answer questions and Irwin, you know, sticking it to them on the stand. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I'm excited about this. This is good news, but more importantly, it's good news for the survivors of the abuse. So I can't wait to see what happens next.
Indeed. Irwin, I have to ask, it does seem a little bit too good to be true to think of the governing body actually being called to account for their policies in a court of law. Do you anticipate that it will come to that, or do you think that they may try to squirm out of again being called to account in that way?
Well, I think they're going to have a legal obligation to at least appear in at a deposition, which is out of court testimony that we can take in a civil case like this in front of a court reporter and answer questions. They are now going to be named defendants in a lawsuit. They are headquartered in the state of New York. They direct all of the activities of the Jehovah's Witness organization from the state of New York. They are very hands-on. The governing body is very hands-on in making policy and practice for the organization and issuing directives to elders, including directives relating to their sexual abuse policies. And so I think we're going to have the ability to proceed against them as defendants and to take their testimony. Whether they appear, whether they ignore court orders, as they have done in other contexts, remains to be seen. We'll deal with it if they do, but as of now, I think they're going to have to answer.
It would certainly be nice to see them answer. I'm just a little bit skeptical because certainly, was it in the Lopez case, Gerrit Loesch issued this remarkable statement disavowing any connection with Watchtower. They really are willing to jump through considerable hoops when you are asking them to produce information or produce individuals, and they simply don't want to let that happen. Is there a chance that this case could end up that they could end up losing the case by default simply because they refuse to acknowledge the requests that are being made?
Well, there are any number of sanctions that a court can impose if they refuse to comply with court orders, monetary sanctions, or in some cases, their defense can be terminated and a default judgment can be entered against them. That's a risk, I think, that they face if they don't want to, or if they decide they want to refuse court orders.
Yeah, Irwin, you mentioned a default judgment, and that's very interesting because up until we started discussing the JW versus Watchtower case, which we covered last week in our Watchtower in Focus, not a lot of people were aware that a default judgment had been issued in that particular case. And I believe it was in excess of $4 million. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Watchtower appealed that case multiple times all the way up to the California Supreme Court and lost every one of those appeals, and now has reached out to the United States Supreme Court. So, first of all, the default judgment, it's a lot of money, and obviously they're paying a lot of legal fees in association with that because they have some outside counsel involved. Now they've reached the Supreme Court. Maybe we know your time is limited, but maybe you could give us just a very, very brief summary of why they're in the Supreme Court with this JW versus Watchtower case, which they've already lost.
Yeah. So they've filed what's called a petition for a writ of certiorari. That's the legal term, and they're basically asking the Supreme Court of the United States to address the issues they've raised, which have to do with their First Amendment rights to the free exercise of their religion. They feel that the requirement that they produce these molestation files interferes with their religious practices. They are raising issues of the fact that they're claiming that there's a level of disagreement among courts in the country on the obligation to produce these molestation files and that sort of thing. The problem that they have, Mark, is they didn't raise these issues at the trial court level. or at the appellate court level. If they did at the trial court level, they abandoned them at the appellate court level. And so there's a requirement that the Supreme Court has that you can't come to the Supreme Court of the United States with an issue unless you've litigated that issue and given the state courts their fair share or their fair opportunity to weigh in on the issues you're raising. If you haven't done that, then your claim, you have no right to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's premature. You have to allow the state courts that opportunity, which they didn't do. They're trying to make the U.S. Supreme Court the court of original, we call it original jurisdiction, the one that first hear this stuff. You can't do that, and that's one of the reasons for our opposition. And on the merits of it, they just don't have a basis for this claim. There's no these files are being produced under court protection. They're not being made public at this point. This happens all the time in all kinds of contexts. We have in the corporate world, there are companies that are forced to produce their trade information or trade secret information in litigation that's under court protection and can't be disseminated. So there's nothing special here other than they would like to make it claim that it's okay to protect molesters. There's some First Amendment right to protect child molesters, and there is no such thing.
Owen, if I were to just play devil's advocate for a moment and repeat some of the arguments that we do hear Watchtower make in these cases, they seem to want to argue that what the elders get up to is really none of the business of Watchtower, that they are essentially their own free agents, and Watchtower and certainly the governing body can't be held accountable for what elders get up to. They also seem to make the argument that what ordinary congregants get up to who aren't elders is, again, no business of Watchtower and no business of the elder body. How do you answer those sorts of objections?
Everything that happens within the organization starts at the top. And an elder doesn't just become an elder because an elder wants to be an elder. An elder is selected. There is a request made to the Watchtower to approve the elder as in that position. And ultimately the approval comes, and it says so on the documents that appoint the elder, that that appointment is ultimately approved by the governing body. So, and they control the conduct of the elders. They issue directives through what are called body of elder letters and other processes that they have, where they have meetings and so on, and elders are given instructions on how to conduct business, so to speak, for the organization. So they are agents of the Watchtower. They are agents of the governing body. And as agents, their conduct they are accountable. The organization is accountable for the conduct of their agents. And that's true even at the congregant level. So unlike other types of religious organizations where congregation members are voluntarily join and they come and sit in the pews, there's no real regulation over them. That's not how it works within the Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't become a publisher, a baptized publisher within the organization until you go through an education process, until you are tested. You have to go through a testing process by the elders, and then you ultimately have to be approved. And then you're authorized, once you pass that test and that vetting process, then you're authorized to go out and perform service work on the organization's behalf. So you are an agent. And I analogize it to back in the old days when you used to have door-to-door salesmen that would come selling vacuum cleaners or encyclopedias. Those were agents. They were sales agents. And if they did something that hurt somebody, the organization would be responsible. So it's a very similar situation here. It's a different construct than they would like to. They use the construct when it helps them. They try to differentiate themselves from other religions when it helps them Otherwise, they try to say, well, we're just, we're a religion like this other religion. They try to make it work in all different directions. They're very inconsistent.
Irwin, do you feel that their decision a few years ago to only allow circuit overseers to appoint elders has anything to do with what's taken place in these cases that you're filing, which largely are things that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago when elders were directly appointed by the governing body? Now they have direction that the circuit overseer is the point person or the person accountable for directly appointing these elders.
Well, I think it is. I think it would be an effort on their part to distance themselves a bit from the relationship, the more direct relationship with the Watchtower or with the governing body. But they're delegating a responsibility to an agent that operates under their control and their direction still. So I think that from a legal standpoint, it's not going to help them a whole lot that a circuit overseer is undertaking that responsibility. He's still operating on the behalf of the organization. He's not just some individual who on his own makes decisions and just has no responsibility. He's making the decision. If he is, it's on behalf of the organization.
Irwin, I have a question for you.
For the benefit of the organization.
We talked a little bit before about Garrett Loesch and his refusal or trying to dodge replying to a subpoena. Deposition, okay. In these cases that have been filed, what's the potential impact of being able to call a governing body member to the stand? And how would it affect other cases that haven't been able to do that?
Well, I think that, these are the people who set policy. These are the people who have been enforcing policy from the top down through to the congregational level. And it's important to understand how they justify the decisions that they are making when it comes to how they handle reports of child molestation and what it is that is driving these decisions, and how it is that they can't change these decisions when they see and when they know the depth and the breadth of the problem of the molestation of children in their organization. This is an organization that has been maintaining a database of this information of known child molesters for decades. And to this day, they still are requiring that the congregations and congregation elders report to the CCJW or to the service department, which is now basically run by the congregation, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. How do you answer to that? You're the top of you run the organization. You know this exists. How is it that you don't have policies in place that take into account the data of information that about how molesters access these kids, how they are being dealt with when reports are being made, why law enforcement isn't being told, why Child Protective Services isn't being told? There's a lot to answer for, and I look forward to talking with these governing body members about that.
I imagine that when you're preparing for all this stuff, you anticipate what the response might be, or how they might try to avoid being called to testify. Can you tell us a little bit of what you think that approach might be?
Well, I'm prepared that they're going to be sitting there with the Bible, and that they will refer to Scripture at virtually every question, which is something of a little bit of an annoyance when you're trying to get to the bottom line of a question. But we just have to wait and see, Javier. We just have to wait and see what they do and how they respond. And I'm very patient, and I'll be sitting there and taking whatever time is necessary to get my answers. And so, they can obfuscate, they can try to avoid, but if it takes days, as it did with Richard Ashe, who I previously was, they presented him as the person most knowledgeable about sexual abuse policies within the organization, and it took some time and some effort to get through with him, because he would do the same thing. He would try to answer my question by pulling up the Bible and reading scripture to me. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
Irwin, just returning to this particular case as well, because obviously Heather and Michael are going to be represented by you. Are you able to give us any idea of the time scale of the lawsuit? In other words, over roughly what period we can expect this lawsuit to reach some kind of finality? And do you also know anything about how many other lawsuits might be filed, bearing in mind that any state can file because the headquarters are in New York?
All right. So in terms of the time frame, because it's anticipated that there will be maybe 1,000 or more lawsuits filed of all kinds within different organizations under the New York Child Victims Act. I anticipate, having talked with other lawyers and now having seen some court orders that have been issued, one by the chief administrative judge and so on, these cases are likely going to be coordinated in some way into some coordinated proceeding. And they're going to be managed, at least until the time of a trial, in some organized fashion. So I don't know, I can't really answer the question of how long this is going to take. Sometimes a coordinated proceeding like this can actually be more efficient and could take less time. On the other hand, it could also be a little bit bigger of a management issue and take a little longer than maybe a singular case. So I don't know. The people who are filing these lawsuits in New York that are coming from out of state and have cases in other states, as we do with respect to Michael Ewing, his case, I mean, a lot of what his congregation was in Florida and stuff, but he was physically abused at Bethel in New York. So there's a strong New York connection, not just the fact that all of the direction and control and retention and...
Did you say he was physically abused in Bethel?
At Bethel and Wallkill, yeah.
Good grief.
At the farm.
Right.
Yeah. So, we have... this is going to be a tested issue for people who are bringing cases where the congregations are out of state, where the abuse occurred out of state, and they're suing in New York. This is going to be a tested issue. I think it's one we'll win, because we can show that all of the direction and control and decision making and so on emanates from the New York-based headquarters and the governing body, and that's where the negligence, or a good deal of the negligence, occurs.
In previous cases, Irwin, such as Lopez and Padron, that ended up settling, as well as with JW versus Watchtower and many others, the issue of the database came up. And we know that you can't discuss the contents of the database. But is it fair to say that the issue of some or more of those database files will come up in these newly filed lawsuits, so that you again are asking Watchtower to produce those same documents, or maybe the documents within a specified period of time?
Absolutely. I mean, this is look, we have to show what this institution knew. They're going to claim that they've done everything possible to address the issue. They've issued articles in the Wake. They've issued articles in the Watchtower. I just read one of their responses to a news article is that they've tried to educate parents and all this. So they're going to take a position that, you know, we've done everything possible to alert people, to train parents to be careful and on alert for this kind of thing and all this stuff, you know. So they're gonna say, what do you want from us? What more do you expect from us to do? We can't watch these people 24/7. I assume that that's the kind of stuff we've heard in the past. Well, if you have a database that goes back decades, that describes how children are being accessed, that describes the inadequacy of your programs, your responses to reports of child sexual abuse, and you don't implement policies and procedures for fixing that problem, and kids are still getting abused because of that, then that forms the basis of a negligence claim. And so we need to know. I mean, that's a critical issue, and it's one we're not going to abandon by any means. We are going to pursue it in every venue, in every case that we file against these guys.
It's safe to say that for every minute that Watchtower is keeping these records under lock and key, which name perpetrators, name accused pedophiles, there are children who are at risk because these individuals are on the run. Do you think we can see, do you think we might see those records finally turned over to law enforcement in our own lifetime?
Well, I certainly would hope so. And I think the more attention that's drawn to this, the more it gives law enforcement the understanding of how critical this is. You know, it needs to be, this needs to be exposed. You know, there are molesters that are not on the run, Lloyd. They're not running from anybody. They're walking freely among congregants. They're knocking on doors of unsuspecting members of our communities. They're not running anywhere. They're being protected. And that's the crime of it all. I mean, they're being protected.
Indeed. Well, the work that you're doing is certainly bringing us one step closer to the day when justice can really be served and children will really be protected. I'm mindful of the fact that your time is very precious and you're doing loads of interviews right now. So I'll steer the show towards its conclusion. And what we normally do is just go around the panel and ask for concluding comments. But what we'll do is we'll ask for concluding comments and concluding questions from Javier and Mark. So if we begin with you, Javier.
Sure. I don't have any questions, but you know, like I've had the opportunity to interview Irwin on a couple of occasions, and it's always been clear to me that his motivations have been sincere. But I did see the program that aired yesterday, and I saw your reaction to one of the questions about you know, how does it feel knowing that those documents exist and that you can't speak about it. So if there's ever any question as to what motivates you to do this work, I hope we can point to that clip and that'll put all doubt to rest. So I am certainly grateful for all the work that you're doing. And I'm glad that that you take the time to talk to us about it and explain these very complicated legal things in layman's terms and for folks like me and a lot of people who are interested in these cases to understand. And so my only request to you is, if it ever comes to be that you get Anthony Morris on a stand, you please reach out. Let me know. I will book a flight. I will be on the first flight to wherever that may be, and I'll be there rooting for you, just like we are from far away. So please.
All right. Thank you, Javier. Thank you.
It's a long way for him to fly, only to face me in a wrestle for who gets to the chair first. But there we go. And Mark, do you have any concluding thoughts or questions?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Irwin, for being so sincerely devoted to helping survivors of abuse. We know that you're not doing this, you know, for self-gratification, that there are truly sincerely injured people out there. And if your law firm and the others don't represent these people, I think the organizations that cover up this abuse will continue unfettered in their shutting down these victims of abuse and continuing these, what I would call religious abuses of authority. So thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank you for something you said in an interview with another reporter. And that was when you discussed that you actually went to Watchtower's attorneys, and I think it maybe was Mr. McCabe, and following one of your cases, and you offered assistance to Watchtower because you knew there's a problem. You knew there's a lot of lawsuits coming. You said, look, let's help you fix this problem. Maybe we can work something out. And can you tell us a little bit about what happened during that exchange with Watchtower's attorneys?
Sure. So after we settled some cases very early on in our work in lawsuits against the Jehovah's Witnesses and litigation against Jehovah's Witnesses, we're still a little young and a little naive in terms of what drives this organization. I actually approached Jim McCabe, who was formerly an in-house counsel. He was now working out as an outside attorney, and Mario Moreno, who was the in-house counsel, or one of the in-house counsel for the Watchtower. And I said, look, you know, I understand. You have a set of beliefs. Your conduct or the conduct of in how those beliefs are being translated, I think violates the law and is a problem. It is going to continue to be a problem. But there has to be some way to find a middle ground, some way that without offending your beliefs, you could still comply with the law and avoid this problem and mitigate against the harm that's being done to children. And I'm willing to sit down with you or with whoever it would be the person to talk to or people to talk to, and try to come up with some way of bridging that gap. And they were not receptive to it at all. So, yeah.
We did actually interview you. I interviewed you a number of years back, Irwin, and you actually said, our goal is not to destroy the Jehovah's Witnesses. They may think that's what we're after. We are really after trying to get them to change what are really just antiquated and dangerous policies. And when we resolved our first few cases with them, one of the things I asked their lawyers, and Mario Moreno in particular, was, what can we do to change this so that this doesn't keep happening? And he looked at me and said, we're never changing this. So here we are years later in the same situation.
That's exactly right. You got it right. It's been a long time ago. It's almost 20 years ago that happened. So, but
you haven't given up, and you're still at it. And since it's my turn for concluding comments, I think I'm expressing what's on the minds of many who are watching this in just wanting to thank you for your persistence. It's safe to say that you have a long, distinguished legal career behind you, and there are other things that you could be doing at this point in your life than pursuing justice for these survivors and trying to protect children moving forward. And the fact that you're sticking with this, despite the complexities, despite the heartache when you read these stories and when you interview survivors, we know kind of how draining it is just to hear one story, let alone the dozens that you must be hearing. We really do salute and admire the incredible tenacity that you have, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you guys too for the continuing coverage of this, not letting go of this, and making sure that voices are being heard, people are being heard, the stories are being heard. And to me, it's just a privilege to represent survivors. You know, I couldn't think of anything else I'd want to really do. I hate golf. I really do hate it.
Fantastic. Well, it's just as well you hate golf. But thank you so much. And thank you also to Mark and Javi for this special episode of Watchtower in Focus.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching.
Say